In fact, launch report here in London at the headquarters of the IMO. We are really extremely honored by it, and I want again to thank IMO for doing this with us. So you mentioned also, Secretary-General, that you were involved in the negotiations of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and as part of the negotiating team of what we call the Istanbul Agreements, that was the Black Sea Initiative and the MOU with the Russian Federation, I really have seen firsthand the extremely important role that the IMO plays in the world. So really thank you very much for all the support. So let me turn to the report now. So our maritime transport system is the lifeblood of the global economy, facilitating over 80% of the world's trade volume. Yet, this vital sector also contributes to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So there is a lot to be done to really modernize this sector. So what we have seen during these years is a story of the resilience of the maritime transport, but also caution. So despite a 0.4% contraction in total maritime trade volumes in 2022, we anticipate a 2.4% growth in 2023 for the industry, with containerized trade that declined 3.7% in 2022, but is expected to expand by 1.2% in 2023, and more than 3% per year between 2024 and 2028. Oil and gas trade volumes showed robust growth in 2022, while tanker freight rates saw a strong revival driven by geopolitical events such as the war in Ukraine, but also dry bulk rates experienced volatility due to shifting demand, port congestion, geopolitical tensions, and weather disruptions. However, we also know that our data is starting to show signs of shifting trade patterns driven by geoeconomic fragmentation concerns. Our report underscores that grain and oil shipments traveled on average the longest distances on record last year, as countries have been forced to seek alternative markets and providers in a context of disruption. So this is our first message, a message of resilience but caution in the maritime transport. Our second message is the second thing that I said before, that is the push for cleaner fuels and sustainability in maritime transport. So we know that our future is inextricably tied to the choices we make today. So we advocate for a transition in this respect. We know, as I said before, that 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from maritime transport. And because the growth of trade in the last decade and the growth of the need for maritime transport, also the gas emissions have gone up and increased in response to the needs of trade and transport. So what can we do about it? How can we face this challenge together? So we call for global action to decarbonize shipping. However, we recognize that this is not an easy task, and also that cost can be associated to it. So the strategy that we will follow will be key also for the health of trade and transport around the world. So some data that we echo, is not our data, is that the cost that will be associated with decarbonized ships is around $28 billion. And this is, to this you have to add the cost of also the infrastructure development that has to be associated with it. So in a way, we have to be mindful of these costs, and we have to understand also the distributional effects that this can have. For example, in small island developing states or least developed countries that heavily rely on maritime transport. So we already know what happens when transport costs go up. UNCTAD estimated that the supply chain crisis of 2021, where shipping costs grew 4 to 7-fold, contributed in 2021, in our report, we estimated that it contributed to the rise in global inflation of 1.5 percentage points. And this was 5 times higher in small island development states, where this number of the contribution to inflation was 7.5%. That is a staggering number, yes? So we saw the same pattern with the start of the war in Ukraine, where in 2022, where up to 50% of all food price increases were due to the rise in related shipping costs. So, put simply, if decarbonization efforts are not accompanied by economic growth, sound multilateral regulation, and technological innovation, there is a risk that it will leave behind in the short term exactly those countries that it stands to help the most in the long run. Now, we have to do this. This is a decision that has to be taken by the stakeholders, by the partners, by consensus, like IMO is driving this discussion and this negotiation. And we think that it will be very important for the world to go this way. We have to be just mindful of the effects, the distributional effects that it can have in different countries. So some of the good news that we have also seen is that despite the infancy of this transition, because 99% of the global fleet still rely on conventional fuels, there is really hope. 21% of new vessels on order are designed for alternative fuels. So this is a very good development, setting the stage for a new era. Here, our report underscores the importance of system-wide collaboration, swift regulatory interventions, and robust investments in green technology and fleets to make this transition work. In particular, we call for a universal regulatory framework applicable to all ships, regardless of their flag or ownership, economic incentives such as levies or contributions tied to emissions can accelerate this transition by making alternative fuels more competitive and using the funds to invest and ensure that transport costs do not harm the most vulnerable economies. Our third message relates to the aging global fleet. Our report raises concerns that at the start of 2023, commercial ships were on average 22.2 years old, 2 years more on average than a decade ago. More than half are over 15 years old. This is a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is that this gives a push for building new, more sustainable ships, like we referred before. But the challenge is that key stakeholders lack clarity regarding alternative fuels, green technology, and regulatory regimes to guide ship owners and ports, while port terminals face similar challenges in vital investment decisions. So here in the IMO, we are in the place for this to happen and for the negotiations to go forward, so we can have the regulations and the decisions that take advantage of this window of opportunity, because at the end, this is a window of opportunity in terms of the renewal of the fleet. Our fourth and last message refers to the power of digital technologies. Digital solutions are more than conveniences. They are necessities, especially in ports, especially in the most vulnerable countries, and especially in the face of growing regulatory compliance costs. Next week, starting on the 1st of October, importers will have to pay an import tariff on carbon-intensive goods entering the European Union, as the carbon border adjustment mechanism goes online. But most of the administrative costs will be borne by the border agencies, who will have to report carbon emissions for products using CBAM certificates. The paperwork required is significant. If we do not go digital in everything else, it will become overwhelming for many of the countries. Thankfully, there is much momentum here, thanks to two developments that took place here in London. One is that next year, in 2024, the IMO will introduce a significant development in port infrastructure with the mandatory implementation of maritime electronic single windows. This mandate will have far-reaching implications, requiring enhanced interoperability and seamless coordination among port agencies. UNCTAD can help here through our platform of customs called Asecura, and we are eager to help in this endeavor. The other important development is that in July 2023, legislation was adopted in the United Kingdom to ensure that electronic trade documents, including electronic equivalents to negotiate bills of lading, enjoy the same legal recognition as paper-based documents. This is a major step forward, which we celebrate. So, dear friends, let me close with a call to action. As we stand at the doorstep of COP28, our report key messages are not merely policy recommendations, but they are really a call to action. The cost of inaction far outweighs the investments required to make our global maritime system more sustainable and more just. As we pave the way for more efficient shipping and more sustainable shipping, we must do so with the awareness that our choices will have long-lasting impact on the planet and on communities around the world, especially those that are most vulnerable. I want to express my gratitude once more to the International Maritime Organization for hosting us today. Together we can chart a course that ensures the global maritime transport system serves as a vehicle for good, fostering not only trade, but also peace prosperity, and long-term sustainability. Thank you all for your attention. Let's work together to make this more than words, but actions that lead to meaningful and lasting change. Thank you. Thank you all again.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I now give the floor to Ms. Shamika Sirimanne, Director of the UNCTAD Division on Technology and Logistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Amalia. Good morning to everyone. So after a terrible 2022, when the maritime trade contracted by 0.4%, we expect, as our SG said, 2.4% growth in 2023. So this is good news. And we also predict around 2% growth for the sector for the next few years. But please also note that this is less than the 3% trend growth for decades that the sector enjoyed. We also find that several long-term factors are at play, and they will continue to play a role to reshape the maritime transport landscape. Some of these range from the horizontal and vertical integration of the sector, the rise in digitalization, growth in e-commerce, and the whole story of de-risking supply chains, and of course the growing pressure and momentum to decarbonize shipping and speed up its energy transition. So for us, these are long-term trends that weigh on the sector as the sector goes forward. So let me now talk a bit about where does shipping stand in terms of decarbonization. Shipping contributes to 3% of carbon emissions, and you all know that number. And while logistics, digitalization, hydrodynamics, machinery, and all kinds of carbon capture and storage can all contribute to reducing the emissions, we find in our report that the largest potential for deeper emission cuts lies in fuel switch to low or zero carbon fuels. However, the fuel transition in shipping is still in its infancy. So that we need to be aware. The alternative energy fuels most suited for international shipping are primarily in methanol and ammonia, and this is, there are not many ships running with methanol and ammonia, as you know now. And now there are other investments. It's not just the ships and the fuels, but there are other investments also will need to be to take place for this decarbonization action to be successful. This is the investment in port cargo handling equipment, infrastructure, storage, facilities, the whole constructing of all new terminals, the crew skills and capabilities should all be upgraded as we walk into a decarbonized world. So there are these investments that needs to go into. And now, let me emphasize, as SG said, we need multilateral rules to avoid a two-speed decarbonization in shipping, and very much is the work of IMO, and we are here to support our sister agencies' work in this area. A universal regulatory framework for decarbonization that applies to all ships, irrespective of their flags, country of ownership, and region of activity is critical to ensure this level playing field and to avoid the two-speed decarbonization shipping landscape. And as an organization very much looking into the developing countries' predicament in these big changes, for developing countries, a multilateral solution adopted under the auspices of IMO, which considered the special need for assistance of the most vulnerable economies such as SIDS and LDCs, will provide a workable outcome. And that's what we say in our report. And as you consider the economic elements, in IMO, as you consider the economic elements such as a levy or a contribution that has to be paid on emissions, I think we see a dual win-win situation. On one hand, it will give the alternative, it will make alternative fuels more competitive. On the other hand, the levy so collected can also be extended to most vulnerable countries so they can adapt to the new situation. So thank you, and we all know that we need to be on the path of decarbonization and for the good of the species, as you said. But we also need to understand the predicament of some developing countries, so especially the cities and the very vulnerable countries, and they need to be supported. They need to be supported along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shamika Sirimanne, Director of UNCTAD's Division on Technology and Logistics. We can now take questions from journalists. First, questions from the floor. Please state your name, the media, and who the question is for. Thank you very much. There is a question at the back, please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Paul Peachy from Trade Wings.
Can you the mic? Yeah.
Hello, Paul Peachy here from Trade Wings, shipping news sites. You've outlined today sort of a multi-trillion investment that's required over the next couple of decades. As yet, we have no agreement on how that will be paid for. What's your proposal?
Thank you. We can take a further question and then perhaps group them together. Thank you. You can, your mic. Questions?
Ask another one then. Okay. And on a separate matter, that the Deputy Secretary of the International Chamber of Shipping yesterday expressed concerns that growing politicization within the IMO would jeopardize the sort of ambitious targets for decarbonisation, speech in China yesterday. What's your response to that, please, about this?
Would you like to
Can you clarify second point?
Yeah, so there was a speech yesterday in China. There was concerns about regional different types of systems.
You mean
he also said that Mr. Bennett said that there were concerns that the increased political disagreement, growth of political blocs, competing political blocs at the IMA could jeopardise that progress.
that is a second point relevant to the sort of economic major regional one. Correct.
Yes, well, overall drive.
If I may answer the particular respect to second point, as you know well, there is a certain progressive development in terms of collaboration and cooperation with the IMO and a certain region. And that certain aspect which is relevant to any action from a certain region, it is not based on only one element. It contains a very diversified, multifaceted aspect. With that, since IMO adopted the strategy last July, based on that one, the IMO's global solution definitely will be respected whole stakeholders and the whole global community, including maritime sectors. So, and also IMO, following IMO's strategy, we have already timeline set the development of the mid-term strategy by 25 and then implemented 27. Some language, additional language there, but our time plane, basic time plane like that one. So with that in mind, there should be a very, how to say, smart collaboration, smart system, which will be implemented to global maritime community. So this is what we understand. In this regard, in the course of that discussion a few times, we had confirmation from a certain region which will respect the global solution to be developed by the IMO. This is what I answer. respect to the first question regarding who pay, but in a way, these investment, it is relevant to the public consideration and the private consideration as well. Over the years, development of the regulatory framework, which may be developed of the IMO, all the time, there is a certain investment from the public and the private sector, subject to the progress, subject to the commercial interest from the private sector. With that in mind, we expect will be a proper investment, of course, the private sector, as the shipping sector has been raising voices so far. Thanks to the certainty of global regulation, there will be proper investment in the private sector. When it comes to a particular element like certain alternative fuels, bunkering service, that is already mentioned in a different document, could be supported by the certain public fund, could be supported certain fund generated by the so-called economic measure, used to be a market-based measure. But we believe private sector, including energy industry and including other private sector, will be very positively participate in, subject to the proper certainty of our regulation, which is now making progress following our timeline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will also give the floor to the Secretary-General of UNCTAD for that same question. Please, Secretary.
Yeah, I completely agree with what the Secretary-General of IMO have said. Let me say that what we would like to see is this being put also in the costing of the transition that has to be done for sustainable development. Yes, the maritime industry is very important. And so I agree that it will have to be public-private partnerships. Yes. But they are already, plans and investments happening in port infrastructure and in renewable of the fleet, for example. And if there will be a proper framework of the regulation, like the Secretary-General of IMO said, so we will be able to have those already investments to go in the right direction. Because if not, we will lose the opportunity. These investments will be there for the next 30, 50 years, yes, in ports or in the fleet for the next 20 years. So if we don't take action now, we will lose the opportunity to adapt those investments to the new horizon and the new regulatory framework. I always mention one phrase that I learned many years ago, that is that the short and the long term start at the same time. You cannot have a long term if you don't start now. A succession of short terms won't make us get to the objective. Yes, we need to plan today for the long term, having the horizon, the regulatory framework, and the certainties from the decisions that the industry in the framework of the IMO will take. But we also have a call for public funds to be available, because a lot of the infrastructure will also have to leverage private investment from public funds. So it will be very important that the multilateral development banks will take this sector into account. That has not been really the case in the last years. Yes, so there is a call from the UN for the multilateral development banks and the regional development banks to really scale up the efforts for the investments that we need for the transformation, because it will be difficult that all the effort will come from domestic public funds, to leverage really international foreign investment, international private sector investment in the sector. We will need also the scaling up of the multilateral development banks for the investments that are required.
respect to element relating to the climate change, we we plan to organize a session with medias. That is will be 6th of October, and we expect that time IMO Secretariat we will make a certain comprehensive presentation relating to our strategy. When we will have a very constructive, positive discussion. At the same time, we are willing, we are hoping to hear like insightful comment or ideas also from a journalist to work together. Finally, regarding investment, I was New York and China, and before that, other part of the maritime the hub. Several places, particular port industry already making plan how to prepare for the certain system which is a coming future. So I see very positive development. But at the same time, as I mentioned, we also were concerned about the reason where certain all facilities underdeveloped yet. So that is also we are concerned. But as I mentioned, relevant to that aspect will be more consideration. But we will have a more specific dialogue on 6th of October. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just to add, you see, we work a lot with ports in UNCTAD. We have a massive port program where we work with developing country ports and supporting them, building capabilities. One of the things that we see very increasingly is they're quite keen on to be part of the decarbonization journey. They are quite keen to, there are many questions asked, how do we change our port cargo handling, the port bunkering, the infrastructure, the storage facilities, and the new terminal. So they are ready. They want to be in the game. But as SD and both SD said, the investments are necessary. And plus, I think a lot of ports are also want to be in part of the green corridors that have been created. They want the green corridors to be inclusive. So they are also part of these green corridor initiatives. So the ports want to be, in many developing countries, ports want to be on the journey of decarbonization.
Thank you very much. There is a further question on the sustainability issue. We give the floor to Nina Larsen from AFP.
Yes, hi, thank you for taking my question. I was hoping you could say something. We've seen the level of water in the Panama Canal is very low, and lots of boats can't cross. The Suez Canal is also easily blocked. If you could say something about the fragility of such crucial maritime routes and also the impact it's having on shipping distances traveled, also emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Secretary-General, both of UNCTAD and IMO, to comment on the sustainability aspect. Any further comments?
Regarding these issues, may I invite my successor, who is coincidentally Panama. So I'm hoping to hear from him on that element first. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you, Secretary-General, for that. When it comes to the Panama Canal, and now you from being Panamanian, having been involved recently in conversations, this is a pattern that has come up in the last few decades with the effects of El Nino. And of course, this year has been particularly difficult for the country. The Panama Canal authorities actually been working for several years on the future plans to safeguard the water supply of the Panama Canal with developments and possible constructions, for example, new reservoirs to carry out this support. Of course, it's a growing population, it's a growing country, it's a growing trade, and that's why all these impacts needs to be taken into account for the future. So yes, it's a difficult situation at the moment, which of course with logistical arrangements, the canal has been managing the waiting time and trying to reduce disruption as much as possible. Now, when it comes to what changes this has caused in trade and how it has affected or how it has increased emissions, for example, in other areas or in relation to this, because this is a developing situation right now. We don't really have the data currently, so this is something that we will have to wait for the reporting of the ships for this year, for 2023, for example, and when we do the analysis for next year, we'll be in a possibility to actually provide further input in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I give the final opportunity to the Secretary-General.
Let me say two things here. First, this is the new normal. And that gives me the opportunity to put the accent and the emphasis also on the adaptation agenda, because we will have to adapt our infrastructure and the maritime infrastructure to the climate conditions. And precisely, this is one of the big discussions in the COP, and will be one of the big discussions in COP 28. Yeah, that the adaptation funds are precisely the funds that are more scarce, because the private investments, yes, that are needed go more for the mitigation and new infrastructure, not necessarily for the adaptation of the old infrastructure. And that's why the developing countries have been pushing for adaptation funds to be able to make the necessary investments to protect you from already the climate change impact. But the other thing that I think is very important that IMO has emphasized always is that you will need multi-stakeholder consensus building to do this. Yes, this is something that won't be that is not possible without consultation of different positions around the world at the international level. And again, that puts IMO in a very strategic position towards the future in terms of multi-stakeholder dialogue and consensus building for the future.
Thank you very much, Secretary-General. I see a hand raised here in the front row. Please state your name and media.
Hi, Richard Mead, editor of Lloyd's List. Just expanding on that thought of supply chain resilience, we've heard a lot from governments talking up what they are able to do in terms of supply chain resilience. Is there anything from your data in terms of this retrospective look at what has happened as a result of changing trade lanes, as you say? Are you seeing any evidence that supply chains are becoming more resilient? Is there any evidence that things are being done to shore up the prospect of that not happening again, or are they fundamentally fragile?
Very good question. What we see in terms of trade trends, to put it that way, is that nearshoring is happening. Yes, that is part of looking for risk reduction, let's say, in the global supply chain, trying to diversify the sources of the different sources of inputs for the supply chain. We see this clearly in two examples are Mexico and Vietnam, yes, that are seeing a lot of investment for nearshoring. We see more regional integration efforts also as part of the trade trends. not yet at the scale that some have predicted, but we see, a renewal of the narrative and the policy efforts for regional integration. Here, Africa is the best example with the continental free trade area. Yeah, and that will have also implications in terms of logistics and maritime transport. Yes, for the future. Now, is diversification enough? Maybe is the question that I will have. Is diversification of the sources enough for more resilience in the global supply chain? And there you are right that we still have we say in the report that we have longer distances being traveled. It's mainly because of the disruption in the Black Sea. Yes, and because of the war in Ukraine. So it will be very important to try to mitigate the risk factors that we are having because of the geo-economic or geopolitical issues to be more resilient. It's not only what you do in the global supply chains by themselves, by the industry, it's also geopolitical issues that we need to take into account. So that's why I said, the Istanbul agreements were very important. In fact, for that, probably what we think is we will have much longer distances to be traveled if we didn't had, at least for 1 year, the possibility of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Now that it had stopped, we could see again maybe a reversal of the positive trend that we saw last year. This is to be seen. It's too early to say.
Thank you, Secretary General. We have a question from the floor, and then we'll take one from the chat. Please go ahead, sir.
Julie McQueen, Ship and Bunker Marine Fuels website. You mentioned ports and the importance, the important role for ports in decarbonization. Are there any particular ports globally that you would point to and say, well, this is how things should be done. These are the ones to watch. And can you name some ports, basically? It's a very basic question.
I will give the floor to the experts, but let me say one thing there. I'm sorry to insist on this. Part of the worry that we have is that what will happen is that only the big ports and more important neuralgic ports will take this road because they will be strong. They have the money. They are in the in the right place to make the transformation and the adaptation for decarbonizing. And then the developing countries' ports will be left aside, will be marginal to this trend. In fact, I remember last year where we said that one of the things that was happening is that the developed countries' ports or the main ports of the world have become much more efficient. And so there was already a gap, a widening gap with many of the most vulnerable countries and here again the seats, yes? And so it will be more and more difficult, more and more costly for these countries to get into the mainstream of trade. So we are worried about that. Now, you are right that, if you want the major impact in terms of decarbonization, you have to put more attention on the ports that have the most activity. The problem I want to just flag before giving the floor to Shamika or to Jan or to the Secretary-General is that the distributional effects will be very important for the world, yes, because trade is the lifeblood of many of these developing countries, especially the small and medium-sized countries that have no alternative, yes, to trade for their growth path. And so I want just to emphasize that point. But Shamika or Jan,
I think, SG, I guess you're our premier expert now on this matter. I think you addressed all the right issues. You see, that's why we see when we go and work in ports, we have our port programs in UNCTAD, we see that the developing country ports are quite keen to also make this adjustment, because the fear is that if they're not adjusted, the ports can be bypassed and ships will not come their way. I mean, there's also not just the climate change, there's also the technology, the big ships movement. So there is a fear that if the ports are not ready to adapt to these new changes coming their way, either through the climate change, so decarbonization, bunkering facilities, or if they don't have deep ports, the big ships are not going to come their way. So they are quite keen to adapt to to these conditions, and they're also quite keen to be part of these green corridors. We see now that many of these green corridors are among big ports, and we also asked in the report that the green corridors also need to be inclusive, so that developing countries' livelihoods will not be taken away from them. So on the last point of the SG, if you allow me, the supply chain resilience, if you will see in our report, we talk about the container shipping. We said the distances are reducing, declining in container shipping. It's mainly because the intra-regional shipping in Asia has increased. And that's where this whole, this Vietnam effect. So many of these, the reshoring is happening, nearshoring happening in that region. So you will see a lot of container shipping movement, intra-regional. So it is a fact, nearshoring, it is happening.
Jan, would you like to
Thank you. Yeah, the colleague asked for names of ports, and we haven't yet given names of ports. But it's not a secret that, say, Singapore, Rotterdam are ahead, but it's in line with what Shamika and SG said about the leading ports. The challenge really for the large number of ports that are at the very end of long-distance supply, and there are three challenges. In future, they will have to provide more than one fuel. Already now it's difficult to provide the classical bunker, and in future they have to provide ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, whatever. Second, these new fuels are less energy dense, so you have to give more volume for the same energy. And these other countries that, as Shamika and as you said, have the fewer resources. So it is really a big challenge. And then we work in the future on the impact assessments with the IMO. That it's not just an incremental and percentage increase, but there's really 0-1 moments where some countries are in risk of being left out. And that's definitely, maybe not answering your question, but I think it's a good answer to a different question.
Thank you very much. We have somebody in the chat who's been waiting for like 10, 15 minutes. Sure. We take that first and then we'll go to both of you if you don't mind. We have a question from Mundo Marítimo, Chile. I don't know if we can give them the floor, please.
Hi. So this is a question from anyone actually in the panel. I was reading that there are about 21 initiatives for green corridors. I would like to know what states those initiatives are, if they are like really early or we can see some progress in them, and how long will it take for them to start operating? Also, are there any potential in Latin America to develop this or even be the leadership, to have the leadership of these initiatives? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Green corridors. Are they on?
Yes. And please, Jan Hoffman from UNCTAD, then IMO.
Well, actually, we have, for the press, we have a special information note on Latin America. We have made some effort to point out the very specific trends for the region. We do see potential in several Latin American countries to benefit from the opportunities from the future trends, from the decarbonization providers of the alternative fuels. At the same time, especially South American countries with high volume, low value exports over long distances, they have, of course, also valid concerns about their export competitiveness so far.
Thank you. From our side, IMO actually adopted a resolution, and we have encouraged countries on the establishment of actions such as the green corridors in order to gather information and for develop and support this transition. And this comes, of course, from the signature of the climate declaration at COP in Glasgow a couple of years ago. Right now, there's several projects being developed, and there are over 20 proposals on green corridors. Within Latin America, there are negotiations between countries, and Chile is one of those that is developing national green corridors as well as partnership with other countries on international level. And of course, all that information will continue to be provided to IMO in order to see what further assistance we can provide as this initiative moves on from the member states.
Thank you very much. We now take a question right from the back of the room who's been waiting for some time. Thank you for your patience. Please go ahead and speak to your media.
My name is Namrata Nankani. I work on the International Chamber of Shipping newsletter. I have a question for Secretary-General of UNCTAD, Rebeca. You talked about long-term and short-term actions and the importance of having both. Can I just check, what long-term and short-term actions do you think that the governments of LDCs and SIDS should take to make sure that they move away from being suppliers of human power and technology and actually benefit? They become an active part of the green corridors, as you mentioned, would be really powerful, making the most of any available funding, and also benefit from the commercial opportunities of the decarbonisation transition. So if you had a little playbook for somebody in a government that sits in LDCs, what would you tell them to do short-term or long-term?
That's a complex question. I was in government and I know how difficult it is, but well, probably giving advice is easier. Let me first say that we just launched, for example, the African report. And precisely, we were thinking of how Africa can really benefit from the energy transition, because Africa has all the raw materials and the critical materials for the production of the solar panels, etc., in a way that no other continent could dispute. Yes. Now, how can they add value to just being a commodity exporter or raw material exporter and really take place not only in the energy transformation being a consumer, but being a producer of the global value chain? And so there are issues about the policy framework inside the countries. They have to adapt the investment policy frameworks, and they have also to have the right transparency in contract negotiation to be able to have good outcomes from contracts for value added addition for their participation in the commodity, in the energy value chain, renewable energy value chain. That is one. There is a national need that is immediate. Yes, that is the right policy framework. But there is a second condition that is an international responsibility, because only 2% of foreign direct investment is getting to Africa. So if you don't have the finance change at the international level, at the global level, you won't be able, even if you have the right policy framework, you will need the finance, the international finance to respond to the investment needs that these countries have. And that takes me back to one of the questions of where the finance will come from, the billions that need to be invested. And what we have said, well, there is a whole policy brief that was launched by the Secretary-General of the UN in how to reform the international financial architecture, precisely to be able to have the scale that is needed for these investments and to leverage private investment. So to give you one indicator of this, the World Bank today is only 1/5 of what it was in the 60s with respect to the global economy. It's 1/5 of what it was in the 60s. Yeah. So there is also an issue of the international financial system being too small for the task. So how do we scale up the possibility of the long-term and the reasonably interest rates that are needed for these long-term investments? So we argue for the capitalization of the multilateral development bank. We argue for the use of the special drawing rights by the regional banks to be able to scale up. And we argue for a change in the model of the multilateral development banks to be more effective in the leverage of private sector, de-risking investments for this to be able to happen in this country. So you need both. You need to change the policy framework at the national level. You need more transparency in the contracts negotiation and support for a better negotiation in these countries. And at the same time, you need the international community to really respond to the investment needs that they derive from the objective.
If I may add one or 2 points, with respect to the question from Lamata and the answer from the Secretary of the UNCTAD. Actually, in that sense, in line with the GHG, how we help the LDCs, not only Cs, we believe that we need a more like project, more idea, let LDC how them they prepare for future. So with that, we are actually enhancing project to help them and promoting partnership among our member states and also a certain multilateral financial institution together with the LDCs. So with that, IMO established the particular department of partnership and the project. So it is working very positively. So in that sense, we needed to let them know how to prepare. So this is one. And another element is relevant with that the conversation question answer today, particularly relevant to the GHG like strategy, how to prepare. So with that, luckily, we need more collaboration between shipping and the port. But luckily, already a few years ago, the IMO MEPC adopted resolution how we cooperate between shipping and the port, based on the full support from port industry represented by the IAPH. Now, it is the activities, collaboration is growing. So, and in that sense, the IAPH itself is having a lot of consideration how to prepare for the port industry for the decarbonization. Very positive development. And at the same time, why the thought, we are talking about digitalization for the industry logistics and the automation of shipping relevant to the port business. And now already we are talking about GHG, how to prepare. And we talk about the global supply chain. What I see now, we have a certain segmented aspect of discussion, but we needed to look at from comprehensive perspective, not only climate change, not only digitalization, automation. We need to look at overall global supply chain taking into consideration this kind of development. With that, I think, we have been working closely already with UNCTAD, but I think, there are more possibility, potential for us to work together, think about the global perspective toward the global supply chain. So in that sense, I really appreciate the answer from Secretary-General UNCTAD and the Director on that issues. So this is very important, momentum, and we will promote, enhance more collaboration. This is one of another, bigger target tasks, not to myself, to my successor and Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are neighbors.
Yeah, we speak the same language.
We will need to be wrapping up this press conference. There's a final, we'll take two final questions, one from the colleague here.
Thank you very much, Craig Eason from Fathom. You mentioned that the...
Can you state your media, please, for the Secretary-General?
Fathom.
Sorry.
You mentioned that the global fleet is 22 plus years old and more than half of it is over 15 years old. In light of what you're also saying about onshoring and the uncertainty of fleet fuels, could you make any comments about the fleet renewal and whether you see that impacting vessel sizes? For example, will we see a change in vessel sizes being ordered? Have we seen the end of the ultra-large container ship? More mid-vessel sizes to be more adaptable for a changing trade pattern, effectively. I'd just like to get UNCTAD's thoughts on how you see new vessels coming into the fleet in the future. Not necessarily the fuel type, but the adaptability to be meeting the challenges that you see in global trade. Thank you.
A very, very good question. I will give the floor to the experts. But the number that we gave, I think that is a good number in the sense that 21% of all new requests for the fleet, for the new fleet, are already taken into account the new requirements for more sustainability. Now, probably you can see the glass half full or half empty, yes, in the sense that 80% is not there. and that fleet will be there for the next 20 years. And probably this is because of what precisely the Secretary-General of IMO said, that the negotiation on the new framework and the new regulation has to be there to give certainty to the industry of how to go about the new requirements. Yes, but with respect to the size, I don't know, so I will pass the floor to Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, as we had said, the total emissions were still increasing, but the emissions per ton mile have been decreasing. So that's bad news, good news. Now on the good news, to make the glass half full or half empty, about half of this improvement is actually due to economies of scale. So ships were getting bigger, and if you only look at the fuels per ton mile, bigger ships seem to be good, in the sense they are more efficient. And if we have measures at the IMO that are only looking at levies and some economic measures, this incentivizes bigger ships, which have, as was implied by Greg's question, also the negative side on total logistics costs, on flexibility, on challenges for the smaller ports. So it's a double-edged sword. And no forecast here about sizes. The biggest container ships, actually, they have not grown now for more than 3 years, it's quite a long period compared to the previous, and maybe we have reached the maximum sizes, but yeah, another long discussion.
If I may, we have been talking a lot that aspect between shipping and the port. They have been having a conversation about that aspect. Now we have another element, impact of GHG. How GHG issues is regulation affect this process. So in that sense, already, as I mentioned, we are having much conversation in shipping and the port. And now taking consideration impact of like GHG issues, actual regulation affecting age issues, renewal of ships issues, and also together with the energy engine, etc. So with that sense, in terms of the relevant to the size of ships, that also can be a certain topic for collaboration discussion between shipping and port industry. He mentioned about certain unexpected negative impact to the logistic infrastructure.
Can I just add something here? I think the size of the ships will be very much determined by the technologies. I think that one of the technologies that's moving really fast is the material technology. So yes, for 3 years we have seen big ships, getting bigger and bigger. But what is in the horizons with this fast-moving, technologies is something that we simply don't know. Because the big is good for efficiency, which is good for the profit margins. So there is always a tendency for the ships to become bigger because there's more profit can be made. But it is the technology that is holding it back now. But this is a very fast-moving, these nano material technologies are very fast-moving technology.
Thank you. We have one final question from the floor, and then we will wrap up the press conference. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Rhiannon from Nikkei Asia. The review shows China and Japan are the biggest emitters. They're also the biggest ship owners and biggest shipbuilders. Do you have a message for these big players in shipping? What could they do to take more leadership in decarbonization?
What do the big emitters should do?
Can you repeat again?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so China and Japan, they're shown to be the largest emitters, I think, in the review.
China
Ship
and
owners. Ship owners.
ship owner.
By ship owners, yeah, sorry. Do you have a message for these big players in shipping? What could they do to take leadership in decarbonization efforts?
It is I'm very pleased to answer to that question. July, since we adopted the initial strategy 2018, that time already very challenging process. However, since then, July this year, more challenging, more like a sensitive discussion, more tension about this discussion. But in the course of that, despite of different views, member states, they finally agreed to certain consensus, which is very critical, together with the timeline. In the course of that, shipping industry fully supported, fully mindful of the message from the GHG strategy. So not only China or Far East, Korea, Japan, etc. So large part of the shipping community also coming from European countries, all agreed to that the policy. Before that policy, I'm very proud of the global shipping community. They have been eager to see IMO adopt the strategy earlier. So they told they are ready to accept impact of the GHG strategy. So that's why I'm very confident the industry, regardless of region, will participate in the process of adopting GHG strategy. This is very relevant to the previous question, impact of shipping size, now ship's age, etc. But I see that will happen very positive direction.
Thank you very much. This finalizes the press conference for the launch of the Review of Maritime Transport 2023 from UNCTAD, hosted at IMO. The content of this report is available to all of you. Regional press releases focusing on different regions, multimedia content, B-roll, audio, and of course, all our colleagues are available for further interviews. Please check our website and the embargo for this report will be lifted in half an hour, so all content will be available for all of you, and UNCTAD remains available for any further information you might need. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Very well done.